The following program is a podcast1.com production.
Your healthy radio addiction starts now.
Power to the people!
The Laura Ingraham Show.
I'll be fine and dandy. Lord, it's like a hard candy Christmas.
Doug Jones, the Democrat. He will be the next United States Senator from Alabama. He beats Roy Moore. A huge win for the Democrats, a huge setback for the President of the United States.
I don't think you can dismiss the Trump factor in this race. I look at this race and I think the reckoning has continued.
This is a stern and strong rebuke to Donald Trump.
This is a huge defeat for President Trump.
Yeah.
This is deep red Alabama. President Trump made the calculation that he was going to double down, and it failed.
You are listening to the Laura Ingraham Show, 855-40-LAURA. First time in about 25 years that a Democrat elected to the Senate from the great state of Alabama. And lots of analysis. We're going to talk to Steve Flowers. He and I certainly got our casual predictions wrong yesterday. I think we said 7 points for Roy Moore. I certainly didn't anticipate the significant turnout of minority voters that turned out in the same percentage or even a little bit more than they did for Barack Obama.
No pun intended.
In a special election. Democrats are definitely buoyed by this. They think that they now have a secret formula for turning out millennial voters and minority voters in even the reddest of red states. But we, throughout these 3 hours, will tell you why, as usual, the Democrats misread special circumstances and then try to extrapolate to the nation as a whole. Byron York will join us with the national significance of this. We also have big news on the Mueller investigation, namely that the interviews of all White House officials have been completed, and now the Inspector General's office, the Justice Department, is beginning to release some of the text messages between Peter Strzok, who has since been removed from the Mueller team, and his paramour, mistress, what's her name, Lisa Page, and look, people's text messages are people's text messages, but they're just typical liberals. They hate Trump. But it's kind of fun to see it because, like, oh, can you believe how bad he is? Yeah, he's really bad. It's a nightmare. It's kind of the way we talk about the Clintons. I mean, they just can't stand Donald Trump, and the problem is he was actually assigned to work on the investigation into supposed Russian collusion. And that just leads us to wonder what else is out there. Rosenstein, the Deputy Attorney General, is testifying today on Capitol Hill. We'll dip into that coverage and tell you what significant might come out of that. Marty Connors is a former Alabama GOP chair. He'll stop by. And is this just a lame duck senator from day one? Namely, Doug Jones is a liberal. Don't buy any of this analysis that Doug Jones is a modern-day Howell Heflin or a Zell Miller type Democrat or a Joe Manchin type Democrat. Manchin was governor of West Virginia, of course, before he ran for Senate. But I was looking back on some of my old research on Manchin, and I could like Manchin. I think he's a good guy, and I've always liked him. But he was very squirrely on opposing Obamacare, even when he was running for the Senate. Like you couldn't pin him down on what was obvious that Obamacare was going to be a disaster, and on other issues, Manchin has been kind of waffly and a little squishy for the Democrats' preference. But he's not. It's not like he's some lock vote for Republicans on critical issues. So Doug Jones is a liberal. All my friends down there in Birmingham area who know him and have known him for decades say he's a liberal. Yeah, he's a liberal who hunts on occasion. So he's a liberal. So he will be defeated in 2 years because, as I tweeted last night, probably the only prominent Republican in the state of Alabama won the nomination to run against Doug Jones, and he's the only one who could have lost. None of these other candidates would have lost to Doug Jones. Not Mo Brooks, whom I endorsed, not Luther Strange, who the president initially endorsed. And you go back to that, the Governor Ively, who decided to call this special election instead of just doing a normal course primary. Let's not forget that Roy Moore not only lost his bid for the governorship twice. The second time he lost it for statewide office, second time he lost the governorship, he lost it to Robert Bentley. Oh my God. Robert Bentley was snurdly. I mean, he was the most unappealing candidate in the state of Alabama. Of course, he goes out in disgrace, but he came in fourth to Bentley.
Right. Well, that's right. Moore was a divisive figure long before the allegations came forward. I mean, he was kind of, there were a certain group of evangelicals who championed him because of his defense of the Ten Commandments, and he stood up. He really used the social issues to keep his base together, but there really was never a winning base. It was never a victorious base.
Well, I think that when we look at this, Republicans have lessons to learn. I'll be addressing a lot of this tonight on the Ingraham angle. The rush to write the obituary for conservative populism, it is so predictable. It is patently obvious that this race had zero to do with substance and everything to do with the lurid nature of these allegations and the mishmash of Republican support, then not support, hesitancy, special election, 4 guys in, then there were 2, then Trump was for strange, but he really liked Moore, and then Mo Brooks was a anti-Trump during the primary season, then was for Trump, so people were confused about Mo Brooks. Mo Brooks would have cleaned Doug Jones's clock. It's obvious, but coulda, shoulda, woulda on that. But I will say this. You cannot fight everyone at once. You must pick your battles. And in the state of Alabama, you can't play too cute by half with these endorsements. You've got to be careful. This is why I did not endorse Roy Moore, as all of you remember. Never endorsed him, was asked to go down there and speak, and I didn't. And it wasn't because I'm protecting myself. I got to say, and I'm just, I'm going to tell you, I didn't like him. I didn't like Roy Moore. There was something about him I did not like. And maybe it's my woman's intuition. I don't know. I think he's very much holier than thou. Even in his refusal to concede last night, coming to the polls on his horse, he can't even ride well. Everyone's like, oh, that was cool. I thought it was stupid. I mean, unless you're, unless you have a sheriff's badge on and you're in an old spaghetti western, I don't want to see you come to the polls on a horse. I just think the whole thing seemed very. I know he's done this before. Apparently, he rides to the polls on the horse. But to me, given the seriousness of the situation with the race and how tight it was, I thought that looked campy. It just looked goofy. Obviously, I'm being petty now. That's not what matters here. But I just go see your instinct, my sensibility about this. But Doug Jones he's absolutely a lame duck. He's a lame duck from day one, and. Gary Palmer is going to join us soon. Of course, Congressman Palmer, who would be, in my mind, a phenomenal Senate candidate in 2020. I expect a lot of people are already talking about him, and the Republicans have to be careful. We got a lot of, Senate races in 2018. Most of them should go the Republicans' way, and I think that, we're going to go through the map. But the idea that the Republicans are going to, or Bannon or these guys are going to take on Roger Wicker with Chris McDaniel in Mississippi, and that's going to, I think you got to be careful. I think you have to pick your battles. You have to know who's strong and who's not. 855-40-LAURA. This is what Rick Santorum said last night when Jake Tapper was making all of these wild conclusions, drawing all these broad conclusions about what this very unique set of circumstances resulting in the election of Doug Jones, what it means for the Republican Party and specifically for Trump's America First agenda. Let's listen.
Roy Moore turned Alabama to a blue state, not Donald Trump. Donald Trump, I love you, Jake, but to say that this is on Donald Trump tried to rescue a campaign that was doomed. And I don't think anyone would suggest that Roy Moore would have won the race had Donald Trump not been in this race.
Well, Joe Scarborough said, made another wild conclusion, came to a wild conclusion about how Alabama is a lot like Virginia. Let's listen.
The president endorses Ed Gillespie. Ed Gillespie loses. He endorses Luther Strange. Luther Strange loses. He endorses Roy Moore in a state that went for him by 28 points.
It's a kiss of death.
Roy Moore loses.
Okay. Virginia. Let me just, in case Joe is not familiar with Virginia politics, which he seems not to be, Ed Gillespie ran before. Remember when he ran for Senate and lost. Like Roy Moore, and lost. Previous time running, lost. Ed Gillespie was a Bush Republican, late in the game, masquerading as a conservative populist. He's from New Jersey. No one bought it. No one thought it was no one thought it was the real deal. People are looking for authenticity, and I think Roy Moore suffered from the fact that a lot of people didn't think his response to Hannity and those initial questions seemed very authentic. He dug himself further into a hole with that interview with Sean Hannity. He denied the allegations, but then he left a little wiggle room, and then he said, well, I asked mother's permission to date the girls, and it's just not what you want to hear from a 31-year-old or someone who was 31 years old, that you still have to ask mommy's permission for a 17-year-old or 14-year-old. But he said, he did not acquit himself well in that Sean Hannity interview at all. But the idea that Virginia can be compared to Alabama, Virginia is essentially, on these statewide races versus the state house races, it's essentially a blue state. It has been for some time, and it's mostly because of immigration and the growth of government. Right. And look, if Donald Trump or a Republican is able to win Virginia in 2020 in the presidential race, then all I can say is it's going to be a Reagan-type landslide, because Virginia has become less white, less middle class, less traditional, and much more attuned to, the Latino understanding, a lot of Muslim immigrants, Northern Virginia, where all the population center is. It is it's become kind of as Teddy Roosevelt said, a polyglot boarding house. But you add big government into the mix, and Virginia is a blue state. No doubt about it. But Alabama's a red state. Alabama loves Trump. I don't care about these exit polls. They love Trump. That's why you can still get, 25,000 people to show up at a rally. And my friends in Alabama who were not fans of Moore but still voted for him said they were just laughing when people say, oh, no, Trumpism is in trouble. The economy is doing great. Alabama's economy is doing fabulously. Fabulously. But this is what Joe Scarborough said. Let's listen.
A lot of losses last night. Donald Trump, of course, the biggest loser last night. Again, imagine he endorses two Republicans in the state that he says is his top state, a state he won by 28 points, and they both lose.
855-40-LAURA. Raymond, what do you take away from this you're sitting here on your cell phone?
What I take away is we are unfortunately more divided than ever before, and we saw another what I saw as a racial election, in that you had a large number of the African American community came out. The white and the black voters were divided in the way they voted here along party lines. That has to change, and the Republican Party has to find ways to make inroads with the black community, or it will be its Waterloo in the upcoming midterms. That's my takeaway.
The economy has to continue to improve, and Donald Trump has to do what we loved seeing him do during the election, which was go into black neighborhoods.
Right.
I've said this, you have to go into territory that is not traditionally Republican and sell conservative populism. 855-40-LAURA. We'll take a break. I'm going to be pushing you and urging you and asking you to open your hearts and open your wallets this holiday season for my friends at Food for the Poor. $25,000. One of you has the money to give $25,000 to Food for the Poor. I'm offering 2 slots, 2 people, $25,000 each. You get to host the last hour of our show with me before we wrap the show up this year, and it's going to be a lot of fun. We already have one $25,000 donor who just wishes to remain anonymous, and $2,500. We want 10 of you. You're going to get copies of my book, personally signed, all sent to you, packaged nicely for Christmas. So $2,500 to Food for the Poor, $25,000, and anything else you can give. Go to lauraingraham.com or call us, 855-40-LAURA. We'll clear your calls, doing something great for the people who need it most this Christmas. Food for the Poor.
thank heaven for little girls.
When the vote is this close, that it's not over. The votes are still coming in, and we're looking at that.
They grow up in the most...
Thanks to my wonderful sponsors and your support, I'm glad to say that we can provide this podcast at no cost to you at all. As a loyal listener of my program, please consider testing our sponsors because they're the ones who actually cover the cost to produce this daily show. So if you're a dog lover like I am, how about giving your dog, your best friend, a fresh, healthy, and nutritious diet? When dogs eat well, they live longer and happier lives. I'm here to tell you about NomNomNow.com, which cooks the world's best dog food. It's made fresh in the USA and delivered right to your door every week. Nom Nom Now's customized recipes, cook fresh in our kitchen, delivering healthy nutrition you can actually see. Switch to Nom Nom Now and your dog will have more energy, a shinier, softer coat, and a longer, better life. Nom Nom Now really is the best food for your best friend. And right now you can save 50% on your first 2 orders of fresh, healthy dog food when you use my code Laura at NomNomNow.com. That's code Laura and save 50% on your first 2 orders. NomNom now.com. And code word LAURA.
Christmas in Dixie.
Joining us now, Steve Flowers, veteran reporter, analyst, columnist from Alabama. Steve, great to have you on today. Obviously, you and I predicted something different here, 7 points for Moore. But in the end, in the end, what happened?
Turnout. It was just, there was a 45% turnout for a special election, and it was a large African-American turnout, which is inexplicable. We had numbers of African-American voters paralleling as much turnout, more than Hillary Clinton got in the regular election last year. I just don't know what instigated it, but it was all across the state, and it was enormous.
Yeah, how did the Democrats do it? Do we know?
Well, there was a lot of money that came in here. We talked about that yesterday, that Jones outspent Moore 14-1, and he had ads every 5 seconds on television and radio, and he and obviously spent a lot of money on get out the vote. There was a lot of liberal money that came in here from San Francisco, and actually, I think there was a lot of gay money that came into Alabama. That was because Moore had been so overtly bigoted toward gay people and gay rights and that sort of thing, and so. There was he had more money he could spend. So, money's the mother's milk of politics. And, but the enormity of the African-American vote was it was just unbelievable.
Well, and I think that,
again, inexplicable.
In the end, this has very little to do with the Trump agenda, however, and so much to do with the fact that suburban women didn't turn out to vote. We had an enormous 22,000 people did write-in votes, which hurt Roy Moore. That made up the difference, and had the write-ins gone another way, Roy Moore would have won. And those are people who were just couldn't hold their nose and vote for Roy Moore in the end. Correct?
It was a Moore thing. It was all about Moore. You're exactly right. It's very astute of you to realize that there were 22,000 write-in votes, which was the margin. And those votes, every one of them came off of the Republican candidate.
Any doubt, Steve, we're almost out of time, but any doubt that Doug Jones is a one-term, 2-year lame duck, and that this is a seat that any quote normal Republican will win in 2020, such as Gary Palmer?
More than likely. Luther Strange would have won that seat 60-40.
Mo Brooks, Luther Strange, Gary Palmer, all would have won. Anyone would have won other than Roy Moore. He's just a damaged candidate, and the turnout was just enormous because of the allegations and the money that poured in as a result. Steve Flowers, thank you so much for checking back in with us. Byron York will give us the national implications of all of this. What does this mean going into 2018? What does this mean for the wall? What does this mean, if anything, for tax cuts? Don't go away.
And you're going to see in state after state after state people that follow the model of Judge Moore, that do not need to raise money from the elites, from the crony capitalists, from the fat cats in Washington, D.C., New York City, Silicon Valley.
This guy does not belong on the national stage. He looks like some disheveled drunk that wandered onto the political stage. He does not represent anything that I stand for. I consider myself a conservative Republican. I consider myself an Irish Catholic. And he sort of parades himself out there with his weird alt-right views that he has. And to me, it's demeaning the whole governmental and political process.
Well, I think Congressman King is got to take a breath there. First of all, I can point to 3 or 4 prominent senators who look like disheveled drunks at any given time. And I think the part of what's demeaned politics is that for decades, the establishment in both parties refused to listen to the people. You want to know what demeans politics? When the people say, no, we don't want amnesty, we don't want open borders, and yet both parties keep delivering that. Or when people say we don't want government to grow so big, we don't want our taxes to be so complicated, and for decade after decade, they grow more complicated and they grow more onerous. And people didn't want all these wars, but that didn't matter. Did that demean the process? Did people want 141,000 Bangladeshis to come in on chain migration? Who voted for that? Who voted for the transplanting of entire genealogical charts of families into our country? No one voted for any of this. That demeaned the process. So yeah, Steve Bannon made a miscalculation here, no doubt about it. But he's in the arena fighting for what he believes in, and some are going to win, some are going to lose. But for the establishment to come out and say, "See, we told you so," well, actually not. Alabama is still Trump country. Trump's policies are still extremely popular in Alabama. Now it's incumbent upon Republicans to pick their battles. Conservative Republicans need to run quality candidates if the business community is aligned against you. You cannot win in a tough election cycle with the business community completely aligned against you. That's very difficult unless you have like a Trump-type really hot candidate and you have a lame opposition. But the business community has a lot. They have a lot of money. They never wanted Roy Moore. Roy Moore is very divisive in the state, always has been, which is why I endorse Mo Brooks. Joining us now, Byron York from the Washington Examiner has been great in covering this race. He joins us now. Byron, great to talk to you, my friend. So it's easy to stomp on the grave of conservative populism, but what is the real lesson here?
Well, I think there's so many unique factors, some of which you just alluded to about this race. Roy Moore has always been very divisive in Alabama. The last campaign that he won statewide, 2012, he won with 51.7% of the vote. Actually, he was down about 3% in this race, which, given everything that happened and all the allegations, is kind of an amazing figure. But Moore has always been very divisive, and I'm from Alabama. I know there are a lot of conservative Republicans who would never vote for Moore, and I don't think they voted for Doug Jones last night. I think most of them stayed away and just did not vote. But there were a lot of very specifics, and then of course the whole, you were alluding to the Mo Brooks, the Luther Strange thing. Luther Strange was tainted in the primary by his association with Governor Bentley, the governor who had to resign in scandal. And I mean, there are just all of these unique circumstances that piled one on top of the other. And it takes that many unique circumstances, I think, for a Democrat to be elected to the Senate in Alabama in 2017.
Now, let's talk about the African-American turnout, which surprised everyone in the state, exceeding the African-American turnout for Hillary Clinton. What was that attributed to? What is that attributed to? Money? Outside money? How did they actually physically get people to the polls?
Well, I think there was a big sort of stealth campaign by the National Democratic and Progressive organizations in Alabama. They didn't want to be seen supporting Doug Jones. That not that they dislike Jones, but they didn't want to be seen kind of intervening in this Alabama race. So there was a lot of that. But I think you've got to look at this turnout among Democrats, and not just black Democrats. I mean, this was a very, very controversial race. It was on everybody's mind. And what we have seen in all of the special elections this year is that Democrats have been more fired up. Now, Republicans have won most or all of the House elections, the special elections, to replace members of the House who joined the Trump administration. But they did it by far smaller margins than Republicans had won previously. So if you look at Kansas, Montana, Georgia, South Carolina, Utah, the Republican wins the special election, but he wins it by a far smaller margin than you would have thought. And then here again, with all of these unique circumstances in Alabama, the Democrat actually wins by a couple of points.
Well, I think again, when we look back on the presidential election, Byron, and we remember when Donald Trump traveled to Detroit, Michigan, and went to that black church. And I was joking with Raymond that remember that day the satellite went down, and it was an incredible moment. It was like, I want to see more of this. I want to see more of him. Remember, he was inundated with the threats of protests, and so the campaign was concerned about going certain places. But isn't it the case, Byron, that for Republicans to be successful, as the minority vote could increase, they must go into politically hostile areas and sell the economic gains, the entrepreneurship gains, the family values that still hardcore, especially older black Americans believe in, and really do that outreach to jack up some of the African American consideration of Republicans?
That is a fundamental truth, and it applies to Hispanic voters as well. I mean, the number one rule of campaigning is that you show up, and if there are communities that have large concentrations of black voters, Hispanic voters, the Republican candidate, if he doesn't show up, they might draw the crazy conclusion that he doesn't really care about them. But if he does show up, even if they disagree with him, they think he came, he made his case, and we listened to him, and we rejected it this time, but maybe next time we wouldn't reject it. So the fundamental rule is to show up, and that was Mitt Romney's problem as well in 2012. Yep. You remember immediately after that election, Republicans just lost their head about, we'll never win unless we win the Hispanic vote and all of that. And the number one thing Romney could have done to improve his performance among Hispanic voters was to show up and appeal directly to them.
Yeah, he just refused to do that.
I'm sorry, can I say one more thing?
Yeah.
Show up not with a tailor-made pandering agenda,
right,
but show up with the same agenda you try to sell everywhere else.
Right, and just say this is how you're going to have more money in your pocket, not from growing the federal government or growing dependence on the federal government, but by growing your business and protecting your community from MS-13, these gangs that are devouring your children, and we're not going to allow that to happen. I mean, I just think there's such a powerful message to be made and taken to these areas, and certainly the Democrats haven't helped them. So, Byron, I want to ask you now about this Rod Rosenstein issue. Now we have him testifying on Capitol Hill today. New texts out released between Peter Strzok and his mistress Lisa Page, with specific references to how they both are concerned about Donald Trump winning, and as the Daily Caller points out, that there has to be insurance against Donald Trump actually being successful, because it would be so horrific. Are these messages turning out to be, these text messages between the old prosecutor with Mueller, are they turning out to be worse than people thought?
Well, they're just as bad, I think, as anybody thought. And by the way, they were horrified by the prospect that Jeff Sessions would become Attorney General. But look, there is one of the things that I think we both said when we learned about the text. We thought, well, the content of the text will really matter here. I mean, it's important for us to actually see what they said, and then we could make a judgment. And now we see they call Trump loathsome and an idiot, and we think, well, those were pretty bad. And Mueller made a very understandable decision. But there's so much more now that we still have to understand. We're getting reports by the day that knowledge of the Trump dossier seem to have gone pretty far up in the Justice Department, the Obama Justice Department, in the fall of 2017, and we definitely want to find out what's going on there. But this is to learn more about what the Justice Department was doing during the campaign. It is not to fire Robert Mueller. It is to find out what was going on in this campaign.
I do think that this call for the special prosecutor of the special prosecutor is not wise. It looks like the inspector general is actually getting this information and getting it out. But I mean, I think piggybacking more special prosecutors onto the situation is silly.
Yeah, I remember when we first got the news. It was about 5 o'clock in the afternoon about a Robert Mueller appointment, and I immediately said, "This is a bad idea." You appoint these special prosecutors. They have mission creep. Their investigations never end.
Yeah.
They look for crimes, or maybe they create crimes by their investigation. This is a bad idea. So I think a second special prosecutor is also just as bad an idea for those very same reasons.
Let's just for fun, before we let you go, very quickly, the front runner for the Republican nomination for 2020 for Doug Jones's seat. Who's the front runner? Gary Palmer, Congressman Palmer.
Boy, that is a good question. And first of all, I think we're going to see a Scott Brown in Massachusetts situation where you had this amazing, astonishing thing that happened in his case, a Republican winning Teddy Kennedy's seat, and then of course it immediately went back, and Elizabeth Warren won it, and it's safely Massachusetts Democrat. So I think Gary Palmer's as good an idea as anyway, but I definitely think whoever it is going to win.
Tick-tock. Byron York from the Washington Examiner, as always, fantastic to have you on. When we come back, 855-40-LAURA, your analysis of what happened in Alabama. Was this McConnell's fault, Moore's fault, Bannon's fault, Trump's fault? 855-40-LAURA. Remember, food for the poor. This is our Christmas push. Do something that is not only great, what we're called to do as human beings of faith, but do something that will help those who are most in need. Food for the Poor. It is my charity of choice. Love them from all over the Caribbean to Guatemala to all just the people who have literally nothing to eat or clean water. Small donations, even $250 could provide clean water for a year and for an entire family, and food for an entire family. And special consideration given. $25,000 donors. You get to come to Washington. You'll come to Washington, but you'll sit in with me on this show and host the last hour of the show. We're going to have a lot of fun together. $2,500 donors. You get signed copies of Billionaire at the Barricades and a couple of other surprises thrown in. So you can call us on that, 855-40-LAURA. Food for the Poor. 95% of all money that goes to Food for the Poor goes directly to the poor. Stay with us. All right, let's go to Melanie in California. Melanie, welcome to the Laura Ingraham Show.
It's a privilege to speak to you, Laura.
Thank you.
Basically, I don't believe this is a win for the Democrat Party. They had an October surprise, and they reduced Judge Moore to a pedophile. Who can't win against a pedophile? And the Republican Party didn't help him. Trump, we put Trump in office because he's bold and he doesn't care about public opinion. He should have got down there and he should have campaigned for Judge Moore a long time ago.
That's an interesting question of whether Trump campaigning for Moore would have put him over the edge. That's interesting. Might have spiked the black turnout even more, though. I don't have the answer to that, Melanie, but that's an interesting comment. Let's go to Matt in Florida. Matt, welcome. What's your comment?
Hi, Laura. Thanks for taking my call. It's an interesting, you guys are talking about the election, you're talking about future elections and Democrats and Republicans. I'd like to toss something out and get your opinion on it. Well, the face of elections have changed now. Candidate A does not run against candidate B. We have so many variables now with the media. It started with gotcha politics to where they tried to make you look stupid. Now it's just slander. These guys go back 10, 20, 30, 40 years, I'm talking about the left, and now with the collusion of the media, these elections aren't about candidates running against policies and individuals for the people to make judgments. What they're doing now is going back as long and as far as it takes to really skew one politician, to make him look as bad as possible.
Yeah, they did, but they did that to Trump, and Trump won. So, yeah, you're right. It's the politics of personal destruction. We've been seeing it in a variety of ways develop over the last 30, 40 years in politics, really. But you're right. The media landscape is what it is, and people are able to flood into a market like the state of Alabama from California and elsewhere, and perhaps change the way people think about the race. But it's why you have to have quality candidates. You have to have someone who is not afraid to do an interview. I mean, didn't he do that interview with a 12-year-old girl? And also there was an ad, my friend told me, of all these 14-year-old girls on that was devastating ad that was used against Roy Moore. But you're right. It's not about the issues when you have a flawed candidate, though. Don't go away.
Your healthy radio addiction starts now.
Power to the people!
The Laura Ingraham Show.
Take another look at what you see.
I couldn't vote for Roy Moore. I didn't vote for Roy Moore, but I wrote in a distinguished Republican name, and I think a lot of people could do that. Will they do it? I'm not sure. I tell you what, there's a time, we call it a tipping point.
I'm right here.
Richard Shelby, my friend in Alabama who's extremely smart about politics, a friend of 30 years, said, do not discount, Laura, the effect that Richard Shelby had on this Alabama electorate. He essentially said, it's okay. You can either stay home or you can vote for Doug Jones. It's okay. We're at a tipping point. We can't pull the lever for Roy Moore, and it'll be okay. And lo and behold, I think a lot of people listened to him. I mean, did it make the difference? Well, that and like 15 other factors, but it was an important one. 855-40-LAURA. We're going to be talking in just a few moments to Congressman Gary Palmer, Alabama congressman from the 6th District of the state, and someone who I think would have an easy shot at taking down Doug Jones in 2020, because pretty much any solid Republican could have beaten Doug Jones, except for the very, in the end, divisive Roy Moore. Theatrical indeed, but twice removed from the Supreme Court and comes in fourth in a gubernatorial race against a very weak Robert Bentley. And all those suburban women in Birmingham and Montgomery, they just don't like Roy Moore. Never did him. They didn't like him before these series of allegations.
And there were also stories that operatives went into this race at the end and went door to door, including lifelong Alabamians, and they went through into the black community. I was reading some articles where they were not only leafleting, but really organizing drives. They were picking people up. So they really did a get out the vote effort, and the black community proved decisive. 30% of the electorate was African American in Alabama, which is unheard of. Obama only got 28 and 27%. Now the president is tweeting out, if last night's election proved anything, it proved we need to have great Republican candidates to increase the razor-thin margins in both the House and the Senate.
Absolutely. I mean, he's right about that.
And he congratulated Doug Jones.
Yeah, well, I think his tweet was good, and it was magnanimous, and that's fine. We have bombshell news about these texts from Peter Strzok to his mistress.
I thought you were going to talk about Omarosa leaving the White House.
Oh, Omarosa's leaving the White House. She's going back to Celebrity Apprentice.
Back to the texts.
Back to the text. So Omarosa's leaving, and that's April Ryan's happy about that. April Ryan is from, what is she from?
Urban Radio Network.
Radio Network.
No, she's not happy about it, I would imagine.
Why? She didn't like Omarosa, right?
I have no idea.
I don't think she cared for Omarosa, so I don't think, why would April Ryan be upset about Omarosa leaving? She's a big liberal. But all the establishment Republicans are looking like the cat that ate the canary today. They're all, look, anytime somebody like Roy Moore, take the allegations against him, the lurid allegations, put those to the side. Anytime a guy like Roy Moore, a Bible Belt, conservative, was going to slam Mitch McConnell, which was so dumb. I mean, in the end, that was just stupid of Roy Moore to turn this thing into a McConnell deal. I mean, I didn't see how that didn't help him in the end at all. That was just a bunch of bluster. But of course the establishment's going to be thrilled. They think they knocked one off. And this next time, Steve Bannon will either not be able to raise money, they think, by these, fat cat donors who have given him money to launch these efforts, these electoral efforts in certain counties, or that, they'll now put Trump in check. I think a lot of the establishment folks now think Trump's going to come running to them and say, look, you listen to these populists, you listen to them, and where did they take you? They took you down a rat hole. Now listen to us. You should have stuck with Strange. You should have stayed with Strange. He would have been a better, Strange went down in flames because they had the nature of this special election. Well, McConnell got involved. See, there's blame that you can dole out to pretty much everybody in this situation. But Roy Moore, I go back to him. He was a lousy candidate. He was not a good candidate, which is why I didn't endorse him. And, all things considered, I mean, you could make a case that it's better for Trump that Roy Moore is not there.
Well, I think it's 1,000% better for Republicans that he's not there. But it is a black eye on this populist movement. And
no, it's not.
You don't think there's a black eye on the populist movement?
Not the populist movement at all. This is why I wrote the book Billionaire at the Barricades, The Populist Revolution from Reagan to Trump. It has nothing to do with that because the issues of immigration, trade, entrepreneurship, civic pride and patriotism, none of these issues were debated because the personal swamped the substantive. The personal narrative swamped all that was substantive. Alabama remains Trump country. It will always be Trump country. It is, sure, it's the Bible Belt, but it is all about smaller government, more power to the people, law and order, seal up the borders, no more free passes to illegal immigrants, and make sure that China doesn't run roughshod over us in all these trade deals. Alabama's been hammered by things like the steel ripoff by China. Steel and other manufacturers that have been shuttered because of our lousy trade deals. Alabamans love Donald Trump's trade push. And lo and behold, that's doing really well for him. So none of that is affected, but it does matter the type of candidates you pick and the battles that you pick. You cannot fight everybody at one time. You cannot do it. All right, we have a great guest coming up who knows a little bit about the state of Alabama. Gary Palmer is going to join us. He's from Alabama 6th, and a lot of people already thinking that Gary Palmer could be a real possibility in the GOP quest to unseat Democrat Doug Jones. We're already talking about 2020, but that's how it goes. All this news broke, by the way, during the Ingraham angle last night. So it was fun. It was a breaking news show, and I loved it. It was a lot of fun last night. We have an incredible show on tap tonight. We are going to dig in to these text messages that Peter Strzok and his gal pal were sending back and forth during the election in August, September, October especially, but going back to the spring as well. 10,000 text messages were released yesterday. We now know just how partisan and viciously anti-Trump he was. What did he do to infect others in that investigation? We're going to peel back the curtain on all of that for you tonight. We have great guests on tap. You do not want to miss it. Please do me a favor and set your DVRs to the Ingraham angle so that if you're out, maybe you're at a Christmas party, you miss it, you have that on your DVR and you can watch it later on. Okay, so DVR us if you can. Follow me on Twitter, Facebook. Remember, all of our friends at Food for the Poor are looking for you to help this Christmas season. Food for the Poor is my go-to charity at the end of the year of choice for a whole bunch of reasons, but because I've seen them personally help those who are most in need. Children who have no ability to have medical care, and I'm talking even for something like a dysentery, even for a fever, not having the right medication. There's nothing worse than seeing a child suffering when they could be helped by a simple medication. Food, water, clothing, sustenance. These are the things that Food for the Poor provides. Guatemala, throughout the Caribbean, that has been just ravaged by these natural disasters. Today, I want 10 of you to really show me where your heart is. $2,500 each, 10 of you. You're going to get copies of Billionaire at the Barricades signed with a special note from me. And two $25,000 donors are going to be able to host the last hour of my show with me, hang out with us in the studio, do photos, all the rest of the fun. We're going to have a blast together. Maybe you'll even be able to watch the Ingraham angle being filmed later on in the night. You never know what's going to happen when you come to Washington. So 2 $25,000 donors. We're really looking forward to having you in the studio with us. Remember, you have to go to lauraingraham.com. You click on that banner there. That's the only way you're going to be eligible for this. Food for the poor, the best of the best, the angels among us. Don't go away.
I wish I was in Dixie, away, away.
This is the weirdest election I have ever seen. We had Mitch McConnell jumping headfirst into that campaign, spending millions of dollars, trying to keep good candidates out and trashing other candidates in the race, which only made Alabamians angrier. Mitch McConnell should have stayed out of this race, and if he would have, we'd have a Republican U.S. Senator coming up there, not a Democrat.
What about that? Is it Mitch McConnell's fault? I had a lot of folks yesterday in Alabama saying, nah, that's kind of a... That doesn't really wash. I mean, yeah, maybe could have stayed out of it. Maybe on the margins would have changed a little bit. But in the end, we had a sadly flawed candidate who he was like the one guy in Alabama who could motivate all of these outside interest groups, from the big gay money, as we heard earlier from Steve Flowers, to the African American activists.
I think their point there, though, Laura, was that McConnell coming into the race early and putting his finger on the scale for Luther Strange drove people like Mo Brooks out of the race inappropriately. I heard that they threatened political consultants who were they were threatening them, saying if you come in for anyone other than Luther Strange, you're never going to work in Alabama politics again. That's what the McConnell henchmen were saying. That's what we heard. That was reported. Joining us now, Gary Palmer, Congressman from the great state of Alabama, Republican from the 6th District. Gary, how are you?
Good, Laura. How are you?
I'm good. What happened? Give us your take.
Well, first, I want to congratulate you on your TV show. It has become my wife's favorite program. You're doing a great job, so congratulations on that.
Appreciate it.
Now back to the sadder story, and I think I was listening to you just now. I think you hit the nail on the head. We had the one candidate with a scandal that should have absolutely destroyed any other candidate, the one guy that they could beat, and yet they still didn't get 50%. I think that's the untold story here, is that there are a lot of Democrats celebrating, but this is by no means that Alabama's flipped to a blue state. You have a guy
I keep hearing these Democrats keep saying, Gary, that, now Alabama and the country is turning against Trump's policies, that conservative populism, it just shows it as a black eye now. I don't think the idea that Trump's policies of sealing up the border, redoing these trade deals, tax reform, Neil Gorsuch is unpopular in the state of Alabama. Please.
Well, I can tell you, I don't live in D.C. I go home every week, so I'm there on weekends, and there was no policy discussion in this election. I mean, there was no substance to this. There was no discussion of Trump's policies or Roy Moore's policies, and they did everything they could to make sure that Doug Jones' policies weren't discussed. So you didn't have an election that was on substance in the context of policy. It was all about scandal. And then the interesting thing about this is you look at the turnout yesterday, it's almost in line with the turnout from the 2014 midterms. But in 5 counties, the 5 counties where Moore lost badly, Jefferson and Mobile and those counties, the turnout was up 119,000. But still, the write-in vote would have turned the election. That's the real story. This is not a mandate.
Well, when you look at the write-in candidate, the margin was about 10,000. The write-in was 22,000. Richard Shelby came in and said he wasn't going to vote for Roy Moore. He gave a lot of those suburban women Republicans a imprimatur to go ahead, stay home, or even pull the lever for Doug Jones. But the idea that Doug Jones is some modern day Howell Heflin or Zell Miller. I mean, Doug Jones is a liberal. He's a liberal who happened to have been a prosecutor. Okay, big deal, but he's a liberal. And how does a liberal remain in office past the 2 years in a state like Alabama? Is that even conceivable, do you think?
I really don't. And I think that this will be a short term for him. And one of the reasons I think that'll happen is because he's going to have to toe the line with whatever Chuck Schumer says. And if you think people in Alabama dislike Mitch McConnell, he ain't seen nothing yet in comparison to Chuck Schumer. So that's the dilemma that Jones finds himself in.
Gary, are you going to run for Senate in 2020? Are you going to run for Senate?
I need to be where I'm supposed to be, Laura. And, I've got a lot of people talking to me about it, but I'll pray about it. And if that's where I think I'm supposed to be, then we'll make that decision. If not, then I'll try to come back to Congress or pump gas or take up painting or something. But
well, I hope your painting's better than George W. Bush's, which is not great. I hope it's a little better than that, Gary. But well, I think I already launched your campaign last night on Twitter. I think I've already said the Palmer 2020 hashtags are already out there. So Gary is, Gary. I've known Gary. How long have I known you, Gary? Like, I don't know, 8, 10 years, something like that.
10 years. Yeah.
10 years.
Yeah.
And I always joke with Gary. And our first conversation was, Gary, if you don't smile, because Gary's a very handsome man. He's very handsome. He's, Alabama football player. I mean, that's when they were a little smaller, Gary. But nevertheless, you were an Alabama football player. And I said, Gary, if you don't smile, and come on, Gary, you're like a really Gary. If you don't smile, you're not. So then his wife said, just smile more, and then you won. See, that was very simple. Just smile more, and you win.
And that may have been the best political advice I've ever gotten. But I want to go back to this whole thing, where we are in the country right now. And there's never been a time, in my memory at least, maybe in the history of the country, when we needed people of substance more than we do now. And there's a certain attribute that I think is missing in this whole dialogue, Laura, and I think you and I have talked about it a little bit, and that's humility. We don't know the answer to everything, but we go around acting like we do. We're not perfect people. I mean, Madison said if men were angels, governments wouldn't be necessary. But we don't act like that. And I think that played out to a great extent in Alabama as well. And you remember Bill Bennett's book, The Book of Virtues?
Yep.
I had a professor point out something that really opened my eyes to this. He said the one virtue that's not in the book is humility. And I realized then, apparently in Washington, humility is not a virtue.
Oh, no.
But I think all of us need to look at what's going on and have a serious reevaluation of how we conduct ourselves, how we pursue our responsibilities, and for crying out loud, try to put the country first for a change.
God bless you. Gary Palmer, thank you so much for stopping in. Gary's first interview since the Doug Jones victory. First time in 25 years, Alabama elects a Democrat senator. Gary, thank you so much. Take a break. A lot more to get to. Stay with us.
Hi, this is Ben Domenech, the host of the Federalist Radio Hour. We're a daily show coming to you 5 days a week from Washington, D.C., where we interview our nation's top journalists, politicians, authors, chefs, economists, entertainers, and more. If you're looking for a contrarian discussion on news, politics, or culture, give us a listen and subscribe at podcastone.com, the new Podcast One app, or at Apple Podcasts.
First you say you will and then you won't. Then you say you do and then you don't.
The jury's out for you on Peter Strzok. Why?
Well, because as I understand it, and as Comey testified to a closed session, according to the Wall Street Journal, as then FBI Director Comey testified to a closed session of the House Intelligence Committee in March, the reason they hadn't brought any case against Flynn at that point was because the agents who interviewed him believed him. And that was Strzok. So, the fact that Flynn ended up pleading guilty to lying in that interview was not Strzok's idea. Evidently, Strzok wasn't pushing that. That was the very aggressive Mueller investigators toward the end.
That is Andy McCarthy, former federal prosecutor on the Ingraham angle. Make sure to turn in tonight. Excuse me, I'm getting a little ill, under the weather. Make sure to tune in tonight, 10 p.m. Eastern Time. DVR us if you are out and about. We have testimony now on Capitol Hill by Rod Rosenstein, Deputy Attorney General, who has come under fire after Robert Mueller's investigation, in many people's minds, is now tainted, or at least called into question, given the fact that he had on his staff rank partisans with adversarial inclinations against this president. Most obvious now that the Justice Department has released thousands of text messages between now dumped Peter Strzok and his gal pal Lisa Page. And some of these texts are amazing. Calling Trump an idiot, saying that Trump is, Trump needs to be stopped. They need to have an insurance policy in case the wild thing happens that Trump is actually elected. Now, this is someone who's going to be investigating Donald Trump, who believes all these things. So it's not just someone who's going to vote Republican. It's someone who was actively engaged in conversations with other Justice Department officials, and his mistress was. She also worked at the Justice Department, about how to stop this, and referencing Andy. They were referencing Andy in these texts. So the question is whether Andy is Andrew Weissman or Andrew McCabe. Andrew McCabe or Andrew Weissman, both officials at the Justice Department. And the question is, which Andy are they talking about? And when this gets hot on Capitol Hill, I will bring it to you live here on the Laura Ingraham Show.
And the string of these texts, I mean, there are 10,000 of them. One here, seriously, would you not vote Democratic? I don't know, Strzok answers. I suppose Hillary Clinton. I would vote D, Page affirmed. God, Trump is a loathsome human, Strzok writes.
Strzok.
Yeah, Strzok. Yet as many win, good for Hillary. Oh, my God, Trump's an idiot, he texts Page the next day. But it gets much more elaborate and detailed as they go on.
Deputy FBI Director Andrew McCabe was scheduled to testify yesterday behind closed doors on Capitol Hill before the House Intel Committee, and for some reason, which I guess Justice Department officials said it was a scheduling error, his testimony was postponed. Isn't that interesting? But sources told Newsmax and Fox News, that members of the committee are suspicious of the reason given for the delay. One source believes the scheduling conflict was sparked by a Fox News report on Justice Department official Bruce Orr, whose wife Nellie was discovered worked for Fusion GPS, that Democrat operative firm which paid money, ultimately sent the money over to Christopher Steele to get that Russian dossier. Many of us believe that dossier could have been the basis for justifying the unmasking of Trump officials' names that ultimately led to the special prosecutor's appointment. See, the whole thing is a tangled mess. But I'm telling you, these text messages, the ones that we're talking about right now, are ridiculous. I mean, you can't have people who are investigating the president having sent texts to other Justice Department officials desperately wanting to stop Donald Trump from becoming president beyond just voting. One of them, Strzok said, I want to believe the path you threw out for consideration in Andy's office. That there's no way Trump gets elected in Andy's office.
Well, they think that's FBI Director Andrew McCabe.
Deputy Director of the FBI, Andrew McCabe. But think about this. I want to believe the path you threw out for consideration in Andy's office, Strzok wrote to his mistress.
That there's no way he gets elected. So the path, she must have laid out a scenario where he doesn't get elected.
But I'm afraid we can't take that risk, he wrote. It's like an insurance policy. So my question is, was Peter Strzok the insurance policy, or was the special counsel the insurance policy? Was Rod Rosenstein the insurance policy? Was the unmasking that we know they did after August of 2016? In other words, they needed something to go to the FISA court to get the unmasking done after Trump became elected, or before Trump became elected.
Before he became elected.
Before he was elected. I mean, I don't know when Carter Page was unmasked, or when Manafort or Flynn was unmasked. I should say Flynn was unmasked. Flynn was unmasked at some point. But is that the insurance policy? That's a really good question, considering now we know that Bruce Orr's wife, Nellie, worked for Fusion GPS, which had its hands on the dossier. All of this stinks to high heaven, if you ask me. All of it.
Given the consistent pattern here of hatred toward the president, I mean,
this whole investigation should be shut down. No, this whole thing should be shut down. Just because you got rid of Peter Strzok in July doesn't change the fact that you have Jeannie Rhee there, you have Andrew Weissman still there, and now you have this Bruce Orr, who has since lost his title of Associate Deputy Attorney General. He's now still doing the drug stuff, I guess. He's doing the drug interdiction stuff, but he's not doing he doesn't have his title Associate Deputy Attorney General any longer. He lost that title. So you have Jeannie Rhee, Andrew Weissman, you have the questions about McCabe and his wife running against, running for office in Virginia and getting all that money from Terry McAuliffe's PAC, which Andrew McCabe did not reveal. You have the connection going back to the nuclear deal with the nuclear material being bought by Russia, and that all being approved when McCabe was there. And now we have these text messages, which are frankly worse than I thought they would be. But so what I don't understand is then you have people that come on the TV show, come on the Ingraham Angle and say, oh, but I don't think you should shut down the investigation. What? You know what Mueller should do? Mueller should come forward and say, you know something? Given the fact that so many people doubt the impartiality of this investigation, I'm just shutting it down. I can't. There are too many problems here. Too many people, too many questions. Jeannie Rhee represented the Clinton Foundation. Oh, great. She's definitely the person you should put on the Mueller team. She represented the Clinton Foundation.
They did say yesterday he's finished investigating all the White House officials, and it looks like he's going to wrap this thing up in a few weeks, maybe a few months. That, considering the length of these special prosecutions, which can go on for 3 years, 7 years in some cases, that would be good. And maybe a hastening agent for that is all the drip, drip, drip of the bias within his investigators.
This has got to wrap up. This entire thing has got to wrap. This is one big, stupid distraction. It's a huge and stupid distraction for the country. It has been from the very beginning. And I still believe that Flynn didn't even lie in that interview with the FBI. I don't believe he lied. I believe he was terrified. And he just gave them what they wanted. And in the interview, apparently Peter Strzok didn't think he lied. Peter Strzok actually said he thought he was telling the truth.
But why is Peter Strzok, the man authorized interviewing Umar Aberdeen, Hillary Clinton,
Cheryl Mills,
Michael Flynn, the email investigation, Hillary Clinton's email server, all of that, this guy is the investigator on. And yet we see this pattern of bias that has now come out. You can't tell me that hasn't in some way. Well, he almost indicates that in the text, that he may be the insurance policy against the President Trump assuming office.
Who? Strzok.
Strzok? I mean, when you read that closely, he could very well be, or whatever plot he and his mistress had together in the FBI. That's another thing. You've got affairs going on, and they're working on the case. It's trouble. This thing is troubled.
Stinks
from
to
the
high
inception.
heaven. It stinks to high heaven, and this is what happens when government gets too big as well. It gets too big, unaccountable, and ultimately it will come out. But it shouldn't be damaging the president in the meantime. 855-40-LAURA. Your reaction to all this. We'll dip into this testimony of Rosenstein, who, remember, wet himself when the Democrats started asking questions about the Russia investigation, which is why he's like, oh, we gotta go get a special counsel. Oh, Bob Mueller, save us, save us, save us. Rod Rosenstein was one of the single biggest mistakes Jeff Sessions has ever made. That and recusing himself. Total nightmare. Don't go away.
Have you seen good cause to fire Special Counsel Mueller?
No.
Thank you. If you were ordered today to fire Mr. Mueller, what would you do?
So I've explained previously, I would follow the regulation. If there were good cause, I would act. If there were no good cause, I would not.
And you've seen no good cause so far?
Correct.
Rod Rosenstein, a little prickly in that Q&A on Capitol Hill, the Deputy Attorney General. Do you think this series of text messages that we've read to you about the fact that we can't take that risk. I'm afraid we can't take that risk. That's something you'd read out of the old 24 show or Homeland or something. We have an update on Homeland if you guys watch on Showtime. FX. Is Homeland on FX or Showtime? I always forget.
Showtime.
Now their new episodes are going to be devoted to, the new season's going to be devoted to removing a president from office. So it's obviously going to be about Trump, corrupt president. They ruin everything. They ruin the few shows that I have watched. The only one they haven't ruined is The Crown, because they can't. So they can't ruin The Crown. They can't do that. But they pretty much
maybe Elizabeth could go on a special mission to take Trump out.
Elizabeth could show up at the very end in a pink pussy hat, right? She could do that. Then it really make a stand. So embarrassing. Listening to the Laura Ingraham Show. 855-40-LAURA. We'll go to the calls. Do you think this means that this whole investigation should be shut down? And Bob Mueller, respected by Republicans and Democrats, heralded. He was a Vietnam vet, head of the FBI. He was friends with Jim Comey, and Jim Comey sent one of his hastily drafted memos over to a professor who sent it to the New York Times after his meeting with Trump. But to me, this is tainted. You can't have a guy sending a text message to his girlfriend, who also works in the FBI, saying, I'm afraid we can't take that risk, that there's no way Trump gets elected. In other words, they had to take him out. They had to unmask people close to Trump and have that in their back pocket to release, frankly, either before or after the election. That would have so damaged Trump that he would be driven from office or never get elected in the first place. Now, maybe they didn't get it done fast enough, but something happened here. What's the insurance policy? What is it? There is no insurance policy. They just write this for the heck of it? 855-40-LAURA. We'll go to all your calls on this as people are still reeling from this Alabama news. And it turns out that the African-American vote was a lot bigger than people thought. And
over the top. I mean, it was an over-the-top response. And it does beg the question, and this really, in the days ahead, has to be unpacked. Why did so many African-Americans show up in higher margins than they did for Hillary or Obama both times? You had 30% of the electorate was African-American this time. Something motivated those voters to come out. Maybe it was just a great voter mobilization, apparatus, or maybe it was something else. I don't know if they targeted the community with ads, but clearly they thought they had to go out and support Doug Jones.
It's a lesson of, I think, lesson in humility, and it's a lesson in picking quality candidates who reflect the values of the voters and not getting too cute by half. You can't get too cute by half in these. You have to have, if you're going to go up against the business community, you have to have a just impeccable candidate who's strong and is not afraid to do interviews. You can't have a candidate who is not going to do interviews and run away from the press. I mean, you have to be, if you're worried about doing an interview with like Good Morning America, then you're not going to win. If you're worried about, who's that guy? Is it Kelly and, what's the guy on Good Morning America?
Ryan Seacrest.
No, Good Morning America, who did the Kelly and Strahan. If you're afraid of Michael Strahan in an interview, then it's probably not a good sign. By the way, do you see NBC ratings?
Through the roof since
after
Matt Lauer's
Lauer.
out. But to what do you attribute that, though? I don't understand that.
I don't know. I don't get that either. Lauer was popular.
I thought he was. Maybe it was the drama that played out there, and people tuned in to see how they were going to react. But major figure going down in flames.
Yeah. Well, I think in the end, Donald Trump will probably learn some important lessons from all of this, and that is a good thing. He'll learn that he doesn't have to get involved in every race. He doesn't have to comment on every primary contest. He can let the people of the state decide and then let the chips fall where they may. He does not have to get involved in every race. No reason for it. Only when it's really, really, really critical.
Thanks for listening to the Laura Ingraham Show podcast. Download new episodes every week at podcastone.com. That's podcastone.com.
Podcast One has new shows on our new app. Check out all the cool features to help you explore our exciting new programming, like America's Lakers podcast with Jay Moore, Sessions with Randy Jackson, So Random with Corinne Olympios, Attack Each Day, The Harbaugh's podcast, Not Just Sports with Susie Schuster and Rich Eisen, and Sound of Success, The Dick Enberg podcast, as well as your old favorites like The Lady Gang, Steve Austin, Shaquille O'Neal, and Adam Carolla. Get the new Podcast One app in the App Store, Google Play, or podcastone.com.